So I wanted to make a video today about Microsoft. I've been promising for many months now that I'd do a Microsoft video. And, well, let's talk about it, because I have a kind of a conflicting thing, a love-hate relationship with Microsoft, as I always have. But I don't want to start with the origins of Microsoft, because it was in the 80s, and to be frank, I was very young and I don't really have any personal additions to make more than what people know. But if you do want to know about like Gary Kildall and the man who could be Bill Gates, check out Cold Fusion. Their first episode they ever released I thought was fantastic. But with that said, let's get into the companies Microsoft has killed. And I'm talking about the strategies that were developed by Bill Gates, and that is embrace, extend, and extinguish, and the 3 E's as they're often called. And these are the companies that were badly affected, and they were most prominent in the late 90s, which that's when I was really using a computer, and I can actually give you a lot more feedback and just kind of remember all the things I did in the late 90s that were just kind of amazing. So I remember Netscape and WordPerfect being just so dominant. And I wanted to kind of go into actually talking about those two platforms, as I thought they were very, very good and honestly better than any Microsoft counterpart. So let's start with Netscape. Netscape, if you never were around in the 90s and were using the internet, it was a fantastic browser, way better than Internet Explorer, or Internet Exploder as it's often called. But where Netscape was so good, it was just so dominant. It was just what everyone used in 95. Like before Internet Explorer ever even hit the market, Netscape just dominated with about 90% of the market share, which is just a ridiculous amount. And how Microsoft basically went in, and I'm actually going to cut to the desktop because I have to read you these quotes by some of the higher ups at Netscape, and basically how they were like the mafia coming in and just tearing them down and saying this is how it's going to be.
Here were the actual takeaways by Mark Andreessen, Netscape's co-founder, and he said that Microsoft threatened them that they will own the Windows 95 market and Netscape should stay away. He also compared it to a meeting by Don Corleone from the Godfather films. And also he expected to find a bloody computer monitor in his bed the next day, he said. That's kind of insane. And then Netscape's CEO said, "I have never been in a meeting in my 35-year business career in which a competitor had so blatantly implied that we would either stop competing with it or the competitor would kill us. In all my years in business, I have never heard nor experienced such an explicit proposal to divide markets."
So what ended up happening after this meeting of the minds, so to speak, and Microsoft basically threatening Netscape and saying, hey, we're going to put you out of business if you don't play our game. Well, they just did just that. They basically included ActiveX controls in Internet Explorer and as part of Windows 95 that was able to basically push out Netscape. It caused all kinds of browser compatibility issues, and even some remnants of this exist today. In the legal industry, a lot of companies had built on proprietary Microsoft components using ActiveX. And really, why that's a big problem is they weren't well documented. If you weren't a Microsoft employee, there's not very good public documentation, so it's very hard to develop for these platforms. And when Microsoft instituted Internet Explorer, they immediately had compatibility issues getting Netscape to work properly, and eventually they did get it working. But already a lot of time had passed. Also, Windows 95 and 98 had that built-in Internet Explorer. This is kind of a big thing because it's not like today. A lot of people don't realize how convenient everything is today. We simply just log into the internet, download whatever browser we want, and off you go. Back then, having a built-in browser was a godsend because you didn't have to hunt down the CD and then worry about, oh, is this CD old? What version's on it? There's all these problems that occurred back in the 90s, and if it would even install. I mean, honestly, there's all kinds of issues you'd have when installing browsers back in the 90s. So having it built in was how Internet Explorer came to prominence, not because it was good, it was because of basically these built-in and shady business practices Microsoft instituted. So after all this happened, It was basically the browser wars, as they're called, if you're interested, look it up. From 95 to probably the late 90s, Netscape was absorbed by AOL as a company, and the rest is history. We don't no longer use Netscape. Their legacy lives on, though, not to say everything's bad. With Firefox, a lot of the original team from Netscape moved to Firefox, and one could say they had the last laugh because Internet Explorer is no more, and they're all basically that whole team's gone at Microsoft, and that's all moved to a Chromium-based system, which is kind of funny based on its history. So let's get into WordPerfect. It's kind of a dominant factor in the whole industry. It's amazing how much market share it had and how Microsoft just all of a sudden kind of took over and grabbed everything. So how did that happen? Some people think that it was because Microsoft Word and that whole Office suite was just so good and it was easy to use, and couldn't be far from the truth. Microsoft Word was complete crap. It still is by many standards. I work in a law office, and I can't tell you how many litigation secretaries I have. Anybody that was around during the 90s will tell you today WordPerfect is still better back then than Microsoft Word is today. So that might be a stretch, but you get the point. WordPerfect was incredibly powerful. It was very feature rich. It was extremely efficient. Just the display itself, once you got used to its workflow, you were just far more productive in WordPerfect. And that's why some people still use it. But needless to say, Microsoft Word and how it really took over this market share is something that's kind of a weird, conflicting reports on this. But the article I read, and I put all my sources down in the description, was this. Microsoft kind of touted out this new OS, and everyone's going to be using it. It's called OS 2. It was an IBM operating system. And even though they were working like with Windows 95 and other things underneath, and they didn't document pretty much anything very well on 95 or 98. And it allowed them to do this vendor lock-in and force people to use the products they offered, not just the operating system, but every product. So Windows isn't necessarily like this today. You see it a little bit with the Microsoft Store, but you don't run into the complete in the dark, no documentation like you did in the 90s. In the 90s, there was literally nothing. There were people flying blind. Once 95 hit, everything was just kind of put on hold, and everyone was just like, wait a second, all our software doesn't work with this. What do we do? And sometimes you had compatibility mode or running things in command prompt, but a lot of times there was compatibility issues with that. And this was just such a nightmare scenario. And I'm really thankful I hadn't started my professional career yet, but I still remember 95 to 2000. And it was amazing to see how bad Microsoft just abused the system. And that's why people don't trust them. And when I say abuse, how they did with WordPerfect was they basically said, hey, we're going to be moving to this OS, and made everyone believe that OS 2 was going to be the operating system to go to. And Microsoft in secret basically finished up 95 and released it, and then provided no documentation for anybody to basically hurry up and get the product ready. So in WordPerfect's case, it had a majority of the market share when DOS was prominent and Windows 3.1.1 was prominent. But as soon as 95 hit, everyone was just like, whoa, what happened here? It just kind of came out of left field for a lot of people, and everyone was playing catch up, and the only really reliable product, or somewhat reliable, was Microsoft Office.
Now, there's a lot of other examples I could add to this. There was obviously the Java example, as when Bill Gates was questioned by the Department of Justice, Java got brought up a lot, and Java was cross-capable or cross-platform capable, and Gates was very adamant about not using Java because his stance was, why would we make any of our products compatible with other operating systems? It's basically not in our best interest, so why would we do it? And very, very ruthless when he was with this. So very, that's where a lot of that comes from Microsoft. I think a lot of people don't understand when people are hesitant to actually do that. It's because of they're really a ruthless company all the way from 80s and 90s into the 2000s. In the 2000s, most people kind of wised up to this and were smart. Probably one of the smartest ones was Adobe, of all people. I was kind of surprised by this, but they were very adamant about not allowing Microsoft Office to be able to save as PDF. Not even to be able to actually use or edit a PDF. No. They wouldn't even want them to save as PDF. They were like, we want nothing to do with integrating with you in your company. And it's kind of hilarious that that was the case in the mid 2000s, mainly because one, Microsoft Office does save natively to PDF now. You don't need like cute PDF, I think is what I was installing in the 2000s. But these days, Adobe's only on Microsoft Windows and in Mac as well. You know, it does have the Mac suite, but not Linux. So I thought that was kind of a humorous thing. And then instant messaging, it tried to corner that market as well. And I think it's still trying, to be honest with you, with Microsoft Teams and other things it's tried in recent years. But it actually did the triple E's with AOL Instant Messenger. MSN Messenger was a big deal for a while there, but they kind of lost that market and ended up sunsetting that whole thing. So kind of funny to see all of the history here, but I wanted to kind of fill you in at the very start of basically my career and when I was just getting to know computers and doing all these things. It was just such a weird time with the advent of the internet and all this kind of coming out. And when you see people hate on Microsoft, this is typically why. They've had some really, really nasty things, and I didn't even get into a lot of the legal ramifications. They have a huge amount of patents, and they are big on patent trolling. They've always been big on it. And honestly, when they had just a huge stumble between, Windows 8 and had a long period where they weren't making a whole lot of money on that, those patents were making Microsoft millions of dollars. So that's how they were really able to stay afloat, on top of having like the Xbox really pop off and a lot of other fun projects that they had. But that's Microsoft in a nutshell. I hope you guys enjoy it. Big shout out to all my patrons. Without you, I couldn't make videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next one.